All right, here we are. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown. Welcome to you if you're new. Everybody else, what's up? How's everybody doing? How's your ship sailing today? Does it feel like smooth waters? Or is it choppy and the bearings are off? How are your bearings? Do you know which way you're going? Regardless, I appreciate that you've taken a moment to tune in. I want to thank everyone who reached out recently and sent me a note with thoughtful comments about my recent conversations around God and stuff. I really appreciate it. It does feel like it's been a vulnerable place to try to talk about these things. And so having some of you reach out of all kinds of persuasions and different views, it's not like everybody kind of sees things from the same place or has like a same angle in what they're saying, but everybody is thinking about it in ways that seems to me to be valuable, that people are thinking about things in ways that are fruitful to them and are opening up things in them. And I really want for that, and that's what I'm doing for myself in these conversations. So it feels good that other people out there listening might be getting some of that too. So thanks to everybody who's taking the time to do that. And I did take like a little break from those conversations, just like in the recording schedule. But I have something already in the can, which will be a very deep and profound return to that conversation and those questions I've been asking. For those of you who know what I'm talking about, if you're new and you don't know what I'm talking about, you can go back and listen to some of the more recent episodes. But if you know what I'm talking about, I had a conversation the other day that really blew my mind and made me have to reconsider things. And so that's going to be coming in a couple of weeks. In the meantime, I really wanted to try to check in with what's going on now. You know, I've been like looking back into history and thinking about like other realms. And now I wanted to try to touch base with like where we are right now. Where are our bearings? Like I was just saying, like what direction is the ship sailing in, you know? So today's conversation with Andrew Tanner is certainly along those lines. And longtime listeners probably remember who Andrew is. He has been on this show a number of times, and we talk about that some at the beginning. But all the other times he was here, it was in official capacity in his role at Yoga Alliance, and I believe this is the first time he ever has spoken to me in the way that he did. And we talk about a pretty wide range of stuff. Andrew was very deep in the Dahn Yoga cult, which is now, I believe, called Body and Brain, but it was formerly called Dahn Yoga. Maybe you've heard of that before, maybe not. Well, I knew that Andrew had been involved. He had mentioned it to me, but I just did not know the extent to which. And he goes very deeply into it in this conversation. And then he talks about how that ended up leading to him getting positions at Kripalu and then working at Yoga Alliance. And Andrew's just had like quite a lot of experience in the business side of yoga as well as the soul side, as you'll hear. He's got a lot of soul in the game, which we talk about. But he also is a very like data-driven guy, and I've always enjoyed like having a mind meld with Andrew because he does have such an insider perspective on this stuff. And it's been a lot of years since we talked, and I think there's quite a lot of insight to be gleaned from it. Very glad to have had this conversation with Andrew, and I'm glad to share it with you today. Real quick before we get to it, I want to mention that if you enjoy what you hear on the show and you wanted to find other ways to connect with me, there is a pretty wide range of possibilities. Honestly, we did like a little market research or whatever, just like kind of polling of people. And, it just seems like things are kind of rough out there financially for a lot of people. So we have really made sure that there's a full kind of spectrum of possibilities, from like a $5 podcast premium subscription where you get access to the full archives, to my year-long teacher training program, which you can start anytime right now for half the regular price. We have like a full range of prices that hopefully has something to offer for whatever your situation is. So if you did want to engage in some other stuff, you wanted some avenues to explore practice, and you wanted to talk about some stuff with other people that's important to you, you can check it out. All of my stuff can be found at jbrownyoga.com. Okay, I think that's good. I will touch base with you on the other side for a brief moment, but we've got a lot to get to, so let's do that. Let's listen to this conversation I had with Andrew Tanner.
Okay, we're here.
Hey, Andrew.
Sorry, my mic was muted.
That's okay. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, it's great. Good to hear your voice.
Good to hear you. Good to hear you. Listen, I'm already recording. I don't want to have to do a bunch of editing later, so let's just consider ourselves having begun, okay?
That is the way.
That is the way it usually goes around here. You know how it is. It's been a minute. It's been a while.
I know, right? I don't think we've probably spoken since pre-COVID, probably.
That's true. I mean, we've had a couple texts, I think, here or there, but we haven't spoken in a long while. Where are you in the world right now? Did you moved right from the East Coast? Are you West Coast now? Where are you?
Came back, went East Coast, went West Coast, came back to the East Coast. So
okay, you're back round.
2019, we moved to Portland, Oregon. I moved there for a new job, new beginning, being the West Coast, and then COVID happened, completely changed what we were doing, and we decided to move back and live in the Berkshires now. So I've been here for 2 years.
I see. Interesting. Well, for anybody listening here, and just for you and me, I will say this is your 4th time on the show, and there's not many people who've been on that many times.
Really? I didn't know that.
It's true.
I didn't know it was 4. I thought it was like 2 before, but...
No, it was 4, but wow. Here's the thing. Those other 3 times you were here, it was all like in official capacity in your role at the Yoga Alliance.
Right. I was representing the man.
Yes, I looked it up just before we jumped on. In 2016, you were here. We had a conversation about the Yoga Alliance policy on yoga therapy terminology.
Oh my God.
So it was about not being allowed to use certain words on your Yoga Alliance profile page, if I recall, or something like that.
Yeah.
Then in 2017, you and I recorded a live conversation at the last Yoga Journal conference in New York City.
I remember that.
It was a panel of you and me, and it was entitled The Future of Yoga.
Oh, dude.
And I remember you talked about like yoga being like part of the service industry. And it was very ironic because it was the last Yoga Journal conference, like it was dying, and then I was closing my center that year. And I remember us kind of having a kind of like, hey, I think maybe the writing's on the wall kind of conversation. And that was even before COVID,
Yeah, I sold my yoga studio either shortly after that. My last yoga studio, I've had 5 yoga studios. I sold my last one that year too.
Well, you did come one more time after that. You came in 2018 to talk about the Standards Review Project. Right.
Yep.
Which I do think, whatever, at that stage, it was a whole different thing, but they were trying to implement it in some version when COVID hit, if I recall. Kind of changed everything.
I mean, I'll just say that when we got through that process, in which I had oversaw, conversations with over 120 kind of experts in the field in all these different areas, and we wrote, 12 different white papers based on these different groups, and just hours and hours of discussion and debate. And when it came time to kind of present, what I felt we should do moving forward based on the recommendations of and hundreds of hours of conversation, basically I was told, we're not going to do that. and that was why I decided, that was part of the reason I left in 2019. But they dragged the standards review on for like another year or two, because in the end, they didn't really make any significant changes, in my opinion, when they could have done something really powerful and amazing by switching from, an hours-based standard to a real competency-based standard. But it's kind of boring.
Yes. Well, wait a second. We can come back to that maybe, because that is interesting what you said, competency-based and what that might mean. But what I will say to you in terms of my motivation for having you back on now is because I do know you some personally, and there's a narrative that's been something I've been saying since I started this show, where I talk about, how yoga was when I first got to it in the early 90s, how it was much more of like a spiritual, mystical tradition, clearly. It was always presented that way. And then over time, it became popular in the culture, and there was corporatization of stuff, and it became much more about like a fitness and wellness thing. And over time in that, those aspects of like spirituality and mysticism, they kind of became taboo, because a lot of the gurus were shown to be abusers, and everybody had to question whether or not they were in a cult or not.
Yep.
And then I think COVID happened, and that certainly, it was like, even before COVID, there was a certain like a reckoning happening. It seemed to me like everybody's teacher training numbers were down as far as I could tell. But then COVID happened. And then out of that, a lot of us, and I include myself, have been having all kinds of conversations on the show, have really been like getting back to like some of those early things that really are what drove us in yoga from the beginning, and what like healed us in it and stuff. And some of that is the more spiritual, mystical side of things.
I'm on the same boat. Yeah,
that's right. Because I know that you paralleled that similar journey in different ways, but similar ways to me. And if I recall, you did say in one of the times that we talked, because I remember trying to get like personal with you in one of those other conversations, but because you were there in official capacity, we didn't really go there. But you did mention that you were in the Dahn Yoga cult, as you called it. And I remember teaching at a place in Brooklyn Heights called Yoga People. And anybody listening to this who remembers Yoga People, shout out to you. Wendy, who was the owner. And around the corner, there was a Dahn Yoga Center. And I remember people asking me about it, and I didn't know anything about it. And it seemed kind of shady, because I didn't really know anything, couldn't find out much about it. And it had like this crazy polished marketing, So I was like, that's kind of weird. I don't know what it is. But you knew it firsthand, and you mentioned you were kind of in it. So was that your entrance into yoga, Dahn Yoga, or did you have other yoga experience before you ended up there?
So it's a big conversation to unlock. But yeah, I was really deep into Dahn Yoga. I was there for 5 years. I was a regional manager. I was a Guyak Jangnim. You can get like these titles and stuff, and went to Korea and studied in the mountains there, and I have a lot to share about that. But I'll just say briefly, like my first introduction to yoga was when I was 16. Someone gave me the book Be Here Now for my birthday, and I read that in the bathtub and like was mesmerized. I feel like I had like a psychedelic trip just from reading it, and got really interested in procuring psychedelics after that, for the purpose of trying to have a spiritual awakening, and did so. And so then I was kind of really looking for some philosophy, and I thought of myself as like an armchair philosopher. Back when Starbucks was cool, when there weren't that many of them, and like go to Starbucks and read philosophy. And make a long story short, I went to college at New York University. My first freshman year, I was majoring in philosophy, and I was interning for the comedian Jeffrey Ross. the
Okay.
roast master general, if anyone knows him.
Yes. Yeah, I know.
And I just got so fast with, I actually, in that first semester, it's so crazy. Like I could have read a whole book about it. I went to the roast of Donald Trump, the first roast of Donald Trump at the Hilton Hotel by the Friars Club. I went to the Friars Club multiple times for any comedy fans. I hung out with Carson Daly and like just crazy stuff, and was kind of just living the fast life, drinking a ton, using drugs, and just getting way over my skis as far as like being able to maintain like this life, which was partying hard, playing hard, studying hard. I think I got straight A's my first semester, but I was like using cocaine basically to get through my French class, and for those, Jeffrey Ross did not give me the cocaine, and he's actually still someone I hold very dear, and he wasn't into that. He's actually just a great guy, but being with him put me around all these other people. So just want to say that, long story then, my dad got sick with cancer. I had to go home from school for winter break after my first semester, and my father was really sick, like on death's door. And I decided that, I didn't think I was going to go back to school because I was worried that my father was going to die. He has stage 4 Burkitt's non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And my mother was staying at the hospital with him. He was, living at the hospital. I think he was there for over 40 days. And there was a message on her answering machine from this like strange sounding Korean woman, and she was asking about my father and asking, Stephen, Donim, how is your energy? And she was like talking about like his energy and this stuff. I was like, what is this? I was 19. And so I tracked her down, like I returned her call and tracked her down, and she had a Dahn center. She was one of the leaders of a Dahn center in Somerville, Massachusetts. And it was the first time I met someone that was really living a spiritual lifestyle. How
did she know your dad, or why was she calling you?
So like one of the first Dahn centers in America was in Waltham, right next to my dad's sign shop. And he used to go and like practice there. And I'd forgotten this, but when I was like 13 or 14 years old, he taught me how to meditate, how to feel chi, so Dahn Yoga, just first of all, I'll say, as a practice, it's amazing. I'm in love with it as a practice. It is, for those that don't know, it's kind of like a mixture of Qigong warm-up exercises, yogic stretching, and then abdominal focused pranayama or breath control, and then energy meditation where you feel the energy between your hands for long periods of time. And you do that all in a 1-hour class. Your whole nervous system gets completely grounded. It is just an incredible practice. It's like the entire practice is pranayama, but it's like a moving pranayama, and it's very mystical in that sense. So it just skips the physical completely. Like there's no, the whole purpose of the physical movements is to get you in touch with your energy, to get you in touch with your nervous system, and then to increase the feelings of interoception and enteroception that you feel. Like, so
no microtonal alignment cues.
No, right. Yes. So like when I started yoga, my first yoga experience, there was no like put your knee over your ankle. There was nothing about alignment. It was all about feeling deep within yourself. Mm-hmm. And really, I remember the first time I felt like what I perceived to be a chakra, or they call a dantian or a tanjan, like feeling a warmth inside my body that was both blissful and like comforting and just magical. And I had a lot of those experiences. So like Dahn Yoga, like you can see, it's like this love affair that I have.
Well,
right?
Your dad having a sign shop next door and going and having practices and then teaching you some things as a child, that all sounds very dear and tender. But what I know of Dahn Yoga isn't that.
Right. Well, so what's crazy, so I'll just say, I'll get to the cult parts. It's 100%, it's a cult. And by the time this airs, there should be a piece that I'm working on right now that I've been working on for almost 6 years about my time in Dahn Yoga and what I think about it as an organization. And for anyone that's doing Dahn Yoga, it's also called Body and Brain today. What the pitfalls are of it if you have family or friends that are involved in it as a cult. I'll get to that, but I'll just say my beginning was a honeymoon that was beautiful. I came to the Dahn Center. I met this teacher, Master Park. She sat and listened to me. I don't even remember. I remember I didn't really tell her what was going on. I think I started telling her that my dad was sick. And I remember I'm sitting in her little healing room. She had this perfect full lotus posture with like that amazing, like yogi body. And I was like, there with my knees, I could barely sit and cross-legged. And I was telling her about my dad being sick. And in my mind, I was just kind of like saying, please come see my dad. Please come see my dad. And then it was like she read my mind. She just looked at me and she goes, okay, I'll come see your father. And I was like, start crying and just had this crazy intense experience. She came to the hospital the next day, did like an energy healing on him in the hospital. And my mother was there. I was there. The room was crackling. He was in a special room where like he had almost killed off the cancer, but was dying of a viral infection. Because the chemo had just crushed him. And in the session that she did with him, it was her and an assistant. She kind of put him in a chair and he was delirious with fever. And she gently rocked his body, like very rhythmically, and spoke some words to him. And I found out later what she said was she just kind of said, "This is Master Park. Do you remember me?" And he did. And she said, "Do you want to live?" And he said, "Yes." She said, "I don't believe you. Do you really want to live?" And he like cried out, "Yes." And I heard that. And then he started crying. And then they left shortly after. They told my mother and I to like massage his pressure points on his feet and hands. And they said, just love him. And so we did that. And basically during that next hour and a half, he was hooked up to a continual temperature monitor. He had had a fever that was like 103 point something, and it basically broke during that time. And he was crying, my mom was crying, I was crying, and over an hour and a half, it went down to 98.6. And that was an unbelievable thing to have happen to you when you're 19 years old, to witness. And my dad survived, and he's still alive. He's 78 years old now.
No wonder you were into Dahn Yoga after that.
Well, actually, I went to the Dahn Center the next day to like thank them. And like, they wouldn't like, I just wanted to give them some money or something. And like, she wouldn't let me leave. She was like, "You have to take a class. You have to take a class." And I was like, "I don't have any clothes. I don't have this." And she like gave me clothes from this, like, she got me into class. And I just was hooked. It was my first time feeling my body in my life, So then I spent the whole semester off from school and took 2 classes a day, got really into it, and then went back to NYU a year later and started studying with this other master, Master Dahn, who was my main teacher, and ended up, after about a year and a half of living in the dorms, I couldn't really go back to like that lifestyle of partying. So I moved in with my teacher, and I lived with him for 4.5 years. And I read through a lot of my old journals during that time, and there's so much fucked up stuff from that time. Excuse my French.
Yeah.
But there was Dahn, I'll get to the kind of thing about Dahn that is not healthy. So the culture that the Sabamnims or the Dahn masters live in is one where it's like little mini cults within a bigger cult. So every region would have like a group of Dahn centers that they're running. So in Manhattan, we had 4 locations. would be run by a teacher, like a more senior teacher. And they would have, junior teachers that live with them, or maybe disciples or healers. And it was all people that, were trying to find their way in life. And I was lucky in some senses. My teacher was like not as corrupt as many of the others. So I was a little bit sheltered. Like later I found out there were other groups. Like there was a group in New Jersey where the head teacher there was like sleeping with all the women. And I had no idea. And I have friends that were in that group that I literally had I had no idea that like they were doing so much weird psychological like warfare in these little mini groups. And so I kind of skipped over like the real honeymoon, which is when you're a Dahn student. Usually you go through like a series of programs. The first one is called it's to kind of awaken your sense of chi in your body. The next one is about, it's all about emotions and kind of learning to master your emotions. And I would say that both of those are really good because when you're learning to become more embodied and to feel your lower abdomen and relax your lower abdomen to kind of stay mindful, it's really powerful. And the third big program they do is called Shim Sung, which is to meet your true self. And they ripped off a lot of stuff from the Osho group. So if you watch the Osho documentary, you can imagine all kinds of that stuff. I'm sorry, I'm just rambling here. You can cut me off.
No. I mean, this is the thing, like people talk about yoga cults, and this is the real deal. Because there's also all kinds of political stuff, isn't there?
Political stuff.
I mean, who owns Dahn Yoga? In the top, isn't there a?
Okay, yeah. So the founder of Dahn Yoga is this guy, Il-Chi Lee. His name is Sung Hung. His original name is Sung Hung Lee. He changed his name to Il-Chi Lee. Oh, actually, I'm going to share something right now in this podcast that I don't think is public knowledge, which is pretty cool. So this past year, I took a class at Harvard Divinity School, Mindfulness, Meaning, and Resilience with Professor Christopher Berlin. I highly recommend it for anyone looking to make a transition in their life. Really great program. And I had access to Harvard's library and all their research docs. And so I got really interested in researching the history of Dahn Yoga, the history of Korean yoga practices. And these are Taoist practices, but if, Il-Chi Lee, the founder of Dahn, he never talks. If you Google, you can't find out who his teacher was. He never mentions who he learned from.
Maybe he didn't have it. Maybe he just made shit up.
Well, actually, ChatGPT is easier. It was easier to find out stuff from ChatGPT than it was from Wikipedia.
Don't promote ChatGPT. All right, but you found some stuff out. You found out who his teacher were.
Well, I found out lots of things, so I'll share a couple of them. Not everything. Actually, ChatGPT had the wrong answer on these. It claims that he had a certain teacher, but it's just making an inference based on the fact that Il-Chi Lee was a Taekwondo black belt. And a lot of people think Taekwondo is an ancient martial art. But it's just a Korean martial art that was created after World War II. And it was created as a way of national pride in Korea after the Japanese occupation. And it was a coming together of a lot of different martial arts and a lot of different martial art masters in Korea. And anyway, Il-Chi Lee did attain a black belt. I don't know how many dans, maybe 4 dan or 6 dan. 9th is the highest level. And, so he must have learned Taekwondo. And so he had some Taekwondo teachers. But in my research on Korean Taoist work, I came across something called Kuksando, which is a Korean energetic healing practice very similar to Dahn Yoga, that was started, 20 years prior to Dahn Yoga. And I call him the Krishnamacharya of this guy named Chung San, which translates to Blue Mountain. I call him the Krishnamacharya of Korean Taoist yoga. Because,
I see. He's the dude. He's the dude, huh?
He's the dude that everyone learned from. And then all of these schools came out, and Il-Chi Lee. So, and I then was able to meet there's 8 black belts that Chung San like certified and said like, you are my disciples. And his son, this is the Krishnamacharya reference even better, his son is like the Desikachar. His son is this guy, Jin Mok, Jinmok, means true wood element. He has a YouTube channel that's amazing. And he's like the Desikachar. He's like the translator of this lineage. And I'm just so excited because anyone that did Dahn Yoga, you probably realize that they kind of just stay on the surface. They teach you the basics, and then it becomes all a cult of personality. So like in Dahn Yoga, once you open your heart and feel your soul through Shimsung, the next step is healer school, and the next step is master's training. And those are basically trainings to kind of indoctrinate you into loving the Grand Master and loving his vision of saving the humanity and all that. So
all that.
Yeah. But this other stuff, Kuksundo, which is obviously not as popular, not as commercial, it's actually like, there's like, instead of learning 8 breathing techniques or breathing postures, there's like almost 500. And it's a lot similar to Tibetan yogas, and Taoist, so it's amazing. So anyway.
Yeah. I had Alejandro Chul on to talk about some of that Tibetan yoga traditions, and they're very interesting, very dynamic and movement oriented, more like you were describing, like energy based practices.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Interesting.
So there's going to be, I think, a renaissance of this kind of Taoist work coming up. Because when people take the class, they're always amazed. They're like, wow, it feels so good.
Well, we can talk about that renaissance, but I'm curious first to go to the other stuff, because when you talk about the first parts where they open you up and they give you some useful tools and they give you an experience of the world in a more mystical, magical way, which I'm in favor of, but only when it leads to people like having healthy lives, not being manipulated and abused.
Right.
So when does it go south, and how does it go south?
Yeah. All of the programs beyond those first 3 that I described are designed to recruit people that will kind of be like free labor for the mission. And the mission is, according to the organization, or according to Ilchi Lee, is to, I'm sure it's changed. It was, when I was there, it was like 2012, we need to have 100 million Earth humans. He's basically, back then he was looking to get 100 million followers, right? And there are always numbers. So as soon as you kind of get into where you're like volunteering anytime, what you're then focused on is like numbers, okay, how many flyers are you going to pass out? How many people what's your goal? What's your vision? How many people are you going to get to come to this workshop? How many people are you going to get to go to healer school? How many people are going to become masters? And like, goal setting is powerful, but what happens is there becomes this conflation where like your spirituality is how well you achieve your goal. And your goal is like numbers.
And I'm sure if you're not meeting the goals, then you're like failing in your spiritual path or something.
Yes. And that's what happens to a lot of quote unquote Dahn masters is, I became a Dahn master, I think my junior or senior year of college. I tried to drop out of college to become a Dahn master. And my parents threatened to disown me, so I stayed. Very thankful for that.
So what did your dad think? It was his fault. Well, not his fault. It was that beautiful thing that happened in the hospital turns into like fucked up shit, right?
They knew it was a cult the whole time. My dad had left, but they saw it help me so much. They saw me get off of drugs, get off of alcohol, like be healthy, I became a kinder, more conscientious person. I wasn't just, I literally changed my whole personality. I went from being this, typical kind of wild man, like, the best description of my idol in pre-Dahn would be, like the guy from Jack Kerouac's book On the Road. Can't remember his name. Neil Cassidy. Like that was the life I wanted. Like this crazy beatnik, basically, to this someone who saw himself as a healer. So they wanted to encourage me, and they liked that my particular teacher, Dahn Yoga, this is some fun drama. So Ilchi Lee, grandmaster, founder, whatever, he owns, he's probably worth $1 billion at this point. He owns, think of this, there's over 300 locations in South Korea. That's the size of New Jersey. You own 300 yoga studios. First get that through your mind. Then there's over 100 locations in the US. There's over 50 in Japan. And then there's a bunch scattered throughout Europe and Brazil.
Still to this day.
I mean, many maybe have closed from COVID, but a lot of them have just turned into like franchises. And at the time when I was there, every one of them was giving 20% of their revenue to a company called BR Consulting, which is a consulting company that he owned. What used to piss me off so much, I ran the largest Dahn center in the US when I was 25 years old in Union Square. I actually convinced, I was part of bringing together a group of people to put together the money to build this big Dahn center in Union Square, which is not there anymore. It was, for those who know New York City, it was located above Republic Noodle House.
Yes.
You know what I'm talking about?
I remember it, yes.
So of the 100 studios in America, 22 of them are owned by Ilchi Lee's wife in a different company. And like the rest of the 80 or so are owned by one of two companies that I think are now owned by his son, one of his sons or both of his sons. This is all public information, but when I was there, because Ilchi Lee's wife owned those 20 some locations in New York and New Jersey, we had like a different management structure, and my teacher was much more I think my teacher Dahn joined Dahn when he was like 18 or 19. His father I think had died when he was young, and so I think he was in Dahn in very early days when it was much maybe less of a destructive cult and much more of like the beginnings of of an amazing movement.
It seems like it's the same story every time. Like as it gets bigger and scaled, it gets more corrupt.
Right. I mean, Ilchi Lee started teaching in a park. His first students he taught for free. They were like people with Parkinson's and stuff. So his methods were legit and his practices are amazing. But the bigger it got, the crazier it got. And I've heard incredible stories. But I'll just say that we called our studio Tao Yoga because we didn't want to be associated with, we didn't want to call it Body and Brain. I thought that was so lame.
Because they rebranded at some point? Because it was always Dahn.
Yeah, they rebranded from Dahn Yoga to Body and Brain, mainly because there was a Rolling Stone article, a woman had died during master's training. Julia Silverals was a PhD in New York City. She went on master's training, which is a 21-day intensive training in the desert, which I also completed. And she died on a hike of heat stroke. On the hike where you put rocks in your backpack and you're not supposed to stop. So
wait a second. She didn't just have a heat stroke. She had a heat stroke on the hike where you have to put rocks in your backpack and you're not supposed to stop.
Yeah, and those rocks represent your ego and the things you're overcoming. And so now that happened before I did my master's training, maybe. Oh, or maybe it's after. I don't know the dates. You'll have to look that up. But I think it happened before me because when I did the master's training, we didn't hike with rocks in our bag. But we did have to do, 3,000 prostrations without stopping. There was a lot of sleep deprivation. There's a ton of like psychic bullying, I would call it.
And at the time, did you think, what the fuck is this? Or were you just totally in it and couldn't see it?
I just read through my journal like an hour ago before our call. And at the time, I just could not see it. I was 100% in. And for me, I had a very strong sense of self because I think I grew up pretty privileged. I had both my parents. I had a lot of love. And so for me, I don't think it was so bad as it was for others who didn't have a strong enough sense of self. And I feel like I'm really all over the place.
No, you're not. Let me say this. Okay, so when
go
ahead.
Go ahead. You bring me back.
No, what were you going to say? Go ahead.
I was just going to say that because our studios were owned by Il Chili's wife, we had different rules, and we were able to create a lot of our own programs. I used to create my own retreats. And every other school had to just follow the standard, like whatever the BR consulting programmings was. So it's like, you have to run the program with this script, with this, here's your marketing material. Like you said, it was really polished marketing material, right? Because most studios were just using it from like a central marketing office.
I suppose if you're like bringing in good money on Union Square and you're giving 20%, they let you get away with stuff.
Dude, we used to do we did about $700,000 a year at Union Square.
Oh my gosh.
With 2 employees, me and the woman who's now my wife. And our total salary combined was like $55,000.
Right.
So we were sending
most of that went to rent, I imagine, but
our rent wasn't so bad. Our rent was, let's say a year, our rent was $150K a year.
Yeah.
So we were sending like $500,000 a year, our one studio at its peak.
Yeah.
But because also we relied on a ton of volunteers. I mean, I'm sure people that hear this that were there with me at that time this was in 2006, 5, 6, and 7. Mm-hmm. It was like anyone that was really serious about getting training. I used to run these special classes called Tao Power Training. And it would be like on a Wednesday night, and anyone that wanted to attend it, to get in, they had to like pass out flyers. So in a way, Dahn taught me how to run yoga studios. Like I learned.
I'm sure you learned how to run a yoga studio, but I guess there's a lot of different ways to run a yoga studio, and exploiting a bunch of people for free labor is one way to do it, right?
I mean, but what I would say, when I left Dahn and opened my own studio, I still did the labor. I didn't become the cult leader exploiting other people. Let
me ask you about that. So when do you realize you're in a cult, and how bad did it get before you got out?
Okay. So I realized I didn't even want to become a Dahn master. I had been there, and then I had been living with my teacher, Dahn for a few years, and we were trying to convince him to leave Dahn and start his own organization with our little mini group. But he had all these I think in reality, I think he was just scared. I think he was literally scared that he would be hurt, like physically hurt. He was paranoid. There were stories in Korea of people that had crossed Dahn and been beaten up, beaten bloody, like mafia style stuff, like martial arts dojos fighting each other kind of thing, like competing dojos thing. I don't know if you know that idea.
Sure. It's like Karate Kid.
Yes, exactly. Like Karate Kid. Like in Korea, that kind of stuff had happened. And so he was afraid, but he did decide to get married and get money from his mother-in-law and leave Dahn and open his own center in Queens. But he told me, I'm going to leave, Andrew, so you have to stay. And I was 24 years old or 25. He's like, you have to stay and manage our team for 3 years. You owe it to the organization, to Dahn, for helping you grow spiritually. Stay here for 3 years and then you can come work with me. But really, he was afraid that if he pulled all these people out of Dahn, that he was going to get his legs broken or something.
He knew you were running everything, so you would keep it going good or whatever, right?
And I was running the whole operations. At that time, I was running 3 centers in New York City. I was managing a team of 6 or 7 people. We all lived in a group house together. And, I do just want to say, I am grateful. I will never be Me Too'd. I did not do anything sexually inappropriate to anyone. But I do feel that during that time, I treated the junior people underneath me the way I was trained, which was like at night, we would do hard training. We would go out and we would hold postures, for 45 minutes and like, like use, it was like torture, like, pouring water on you and like hitting you with a stick. And like, there was stuff like that. We did like Karate Kid style training. I loved that and learned and felt like personally that helped me. And when I look back on that I did, when I did that with other people, I have doubts that was helpful for them, surely, if in a minimal,
especially because it's in a context of a whole lot of other things. It's not like someone's choosing to do an ice bath or someone's choosing to go to a Zendo and get the stick hit them or whatever. It's in the context of a whole thing to break you down and, like you say, indoctrinate you. So that's
And so I just want to acknowledge that I did participate in that kind of stuff. But like now imagine, because again, that in my group, my little mini group, that kind of stuff didn't have any sexual things tied to it at all, thankfully. But I heard, and I know of firsthand accounts, and I won't share names and things, but I do know of firsthand accounts of people who in other groups had those kind of things happen, but with more like sexual abuse and that kind of stuff. So that was going on in these organizations. And the fact that was happening behind the scenes, and I don't think it's not like it was talked about, or I don't think it was like from the central office, like Il-Chi Li was instructing people to do this. I just think that when you have little mini groups with little mini dictators, and the idea is they call it Sayang Saje culture, which is like master disciple or junior master, senior master culture. There's a lot of obedience that's taught. And that can just be a breeding ground for all kinds of twisted stuff.
A time and time again, not across different cultural, origins, the same things have happened. The same. It seems anytime you kind of outsource authority to someone outside something in you, we get into some trouble. But still, when does it dawn on you, pun intended, I guess, that things are awry and you start questioning it?
Yeah, so I was questioning it pre-master's training. I remember when I went to master's training, Master Dahn Yoga told me, like, look at when you go to the training, they're going to test you. And they're going to say things like, what is the most important principles, of being a master? And what they want you to say is, I got to remember this. It's so long ago. They want you to say like the principles, like the teachings.
Mm-hmm. He fed you the answers.
Well, yeah. He gave me the answers. The answers were, they were like the three treasures. Do you know what the three treasures are in Buddhism?
I think so.
It's like Jing Qi. In Taoism, it's Jing Qi Shen or Zhang Qi Shen, which is your physical essence, your heart, mind, and your spirit. But in Dahn Yoga, the three treasures were the Wali, which means the principles, which is like the three things I just said, and all the principles of energy and the practices. And then it's the vision, which is the goal of like 100 million Earth humans or whatever their goal is at this time. And then Sisingnim, which means the Grand Master, Il-Chi Li. And those three things are like, he's like, that's what you need to say. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, because like before that, I was like, I didn't think it was about that. I thought it was about like our own personal enlightenment,
Nobody had mentioned that Grand Master part there, huh?
Yeah. And then like I would have conversations with other masters and they were talking about him like he was Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
And I went to Korea and I remember anytime I met another Dahn master who came from a different region, they would talk about Il-Chi Li like he was Jesus Christ. And, or a savior, that kind of character. And there's a religious group in Korea, like with him. And I always used to fight with them. I would have like philosophical fights with the people. Like, what are you guys talking about? Like, we all need to become like Il-Chi Li. We all need to become, and in their mind, it was like, no, we can never become like him.
Right.
So when I did master's training, I kind of kept my mouth shut. But as soon as I became a master, I immediately saw the hypocrisy and everything. But I still loved what I was doing. I thought that the work we did in Union Square, I thought, for the most part, we were really helping people. We developed our own programs so that we weren't, sending people through the same kind of indoctrination. But a big fight I had was when I realized that 20% of the money we were making was going to be our consulting. Mm. And we were all living like, penniless, basically, with no health insurance and working to the bone. But shortly after my teaching,
that happened. That's when I figured I needed to open my own place. When you start to look at when you start to do the numbers and you add it up and you're like, wait a second, all these people are coming. I'm making how much?
What's funny is at first I really didn't care about that. But what pissed me off, like I had accepted the life of poverty. I thought that was part of being a master. Mm. And I actually embraced that. I thought we were supposed to be celibate and not. I had no idea all these people were like having sex in the background. But I had all these different ideas about it. But what pissed me off was they would tell us we didn't make vision that month. They'd say, you guys didn't make enough money this month. Oof. I'd say, what are you talking about? We made like $80,000.
Yeah.
And they'd say, no, 20% of that goes to BR Consulting. It doesn't count towards your shilchuk or whatever the thing is. Oof. And that would drive me bonkers. Every day you had to check in online and see which studio in America was making the most money and making the most new members. And it was like, that pissed me off.
All right. So when do you leave and why?
When do I leave? Okay. So my teacher left. Oh, actually, before my teacher left, we all went to this training, me and Master Dahn Yoga. And during this training, Master Dahn Yoga and Ilchi Lee got in a fight where they were arguing.
Mm. You were witness to it?
I was witness to it. Now it was all in Korean, so I don't know what they're saying. Well, I did study Korean in college after I joined Dahn, so I had an idea of what they were fighting about. They were arguing about this Dahn Mudo, which is like Dahn martial arts. They were going to launch Dahn martial arts. There was this big event in Sedona with, all young people invited to it. They have this thing called YEHA, Young Earth Human Alliance. And my Dahn Yoga was supposed to be one of the leaders of it because he taught a very gentle, yin style, like a internal martial art. I mean, his moves were incredible. And we used to, we did a lot of Qigong training that wasn't part of the original Dahn Hak. We did every night we were training. And he was a beautiful practitioner. He had plenty of his own faults, by the way. But and long story short, there was another guy named Owen who could do fancy kicks and jumps like Taekwondo stuff, and put on a real show. They would play music and he would do all these crazy moves, and he was a great guy. This guy Owen, he just had a good energy. But he wasn't someone that could give a lecture about spirituality or something. He didn't understand the theory. He didn't understand, medical theory, 5 element theory.
He had the flash and the glitz.
Yeah. And Ilchi Lee basically said in the meeting, all right, we're going to tell everyone that we're going to make Owen a star. This is what he was saying. He was saying, we're going to make Master Owen this star for Dahn. And he's going to be we're going to, because Owen's a good guy or something. And basically he was saying something about how, we're going to, I don't know if it was that that
we're going to use the flash and glitz to make a lot of money instead of try to teach people the soul of it.
Yes,
basically.
And Dahn Yoga, so Ilchi Lee is talking and no one interrupts him, right? He's the grand master. It's Dahn Yoga just slams his hand on the table really loud. Everyone shocks. And he says something in Korean, with a disgusted voice, I'm, disgusted or something. And then they just all go, everyone starts yelling and screaming. And because like interrupting him and And then like one of the masters like dragged me out of the room. Like, why was I even there? Like this was like, and they got so scared. So then, and Dahn Yoga just gets up and left. And he like, I think he was trying to quit Dahn anyways, or he thought he was. But prior to that meeting, he was saying like, let's do this. Let's be all in and help grow Dahn Mudo. It's really good. It'll be a good thing for Dahn to do. I mean, I thought we were pretty, like we really believed in what we were doing,
Right.
So then like Dahn Yoga leaves, and then like within an hour, they picked the most like beautiful Korean woman master to like shadow me every second of the day. And before I left, they proposed that I marry her.
I see. They tried to lure you in with the pretty wife.
They tried to tell me that I should not go back to New York, not go back to college. I should stay in Sedona. They're going to transfer me to like Toronto, Canada, and I would like be in charge of all of Canada, Dahn World. They're building a retreat center there, and that I should marry this woman who I won't say her name.
Were you tempted to do it?
No.
Yeah.
Not at all. I was disgusted.
Yeah.
I was truly disgusted.
You saw your teacher was mad and stuff, and
yeah.
It was a far cry from the healing of your dad in the hospital.
Yeah. But by the way, a lot of Dahn masters got married to Koreans to help them get visas.
Interesting. Yeah.
And that was very common. Not real marriages, but, marriages to help people get visas.
Yeah. I had a friend who did that actually just as like a kindly thing to do for someone, and it went really south. It was not cool. The whole marriage for green cards thing. But all right. So after they clearly try to lure you in with a pretty wife. Does that mark the time where you're like, I got to get out of here?
Yeah, I got to get out of here. And then shortly after that, Dahn Yoga had left, and he was trying to open a center, and he basically had a nervous breakdown. He had a stroke, and he was like only 40.
Whoa.
Because he, I think, was paranoid. Thought people were trying to get him, like. And he had spent.
Maybe they were. I mean, you said they beat. It might have been possible.
I'm sure people were upset at him, and he was contacting him. I don't think he was ever in danger physically. I really don't.
Okay.
But he had procured a space in Forest Hills, Queens, which was literally 4 blocks from another Dahn center.
Ooh.
And had spent like $150,000 building it out.
Mm.
And had no idea what he was doing because he was all on his own. And he asked me if I would take it over and leave Dahn and take it over and get him out of it, because he was just like broken. And I brought it up to my parents, and they were like so excited. This was 2007, like right before the crash.
Yeah.
And they like sold a bunch of stock to give me money. And I got a business partner who, may she rest in peace, Katie Leisure. She died of cancer a couple years ago, but she was a student of mine. She had money from her family, and we bought the studio from his mother-in-law because he was had spent her money or whatever. And that became my first yoga studio called Bamboo Moves. And I was like, I need to like learn other yoga just because I'm really torn about this.
I mean, that's exactly when I opened my place in 2007, and it was right before that crash. But I did weather that economic. If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.